This is Words Aptly Spoken, which comes from Proverbs 25:11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. The written word is a precious treasure. We want to preserve written knowledge for God's glory and as an anchor to the history of the church and its classical conversations. We hope to encourage the reading of words and of the word.
So welcome to Words Aptly Spoken, where Jennifer Courtney, Tim Knotts, and I discuss books from the Classical Conversations curated curriculum each week. Today is Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024, and lots of people are on vacation. So I'm Lee Bortons, joined by Stephanie Meter, her mother Lisa Bailey, and Kelly Wilt. All three of them are Classical Conversations multimedia curriculum developers. And we want to welcome Emma and baby Violet back. She's back from maternity leave, and we really thank Julie for making sure the episodes could continue while Emma had time to bond with that beautiful baby. So Lisa, tell us about this month's shows.
Well, I want to tell you about that. And I want to tell you about one other thing. Stephanie Meter is also on vacation. So today we have Linnell Lowe with us in Stephanie's place. So we are all excited about talking about today's shows. But this month, we are going to explore some of Challenge 1's curriculum. We'll be talking about the sign of the Beaver by Elizabeth George Speare today. And then later this month, The Witch of Blackbird Pond, The Scarlet Letter, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Johnny Tremaine. July's a long month, so we have lots to talk about, Lee.
That's great. Hey, Linnell, I know you don't look like Stephanie. That's what I get for reading the script. Welcome, Linnell.
Thank you. No worries.
So you can access this episode as well as future episodes and the past from 23 and 24 on YouTube at Lee Bortons or my leebortons.com website where the calendar is, as well as links to purchasing the books that we study from classicalconversationsbooks.com. And I hope that these are helpful to you. I know that we have a lot of fun talking about these books, but we're literature nerds, which is a really fun thing.
That's true. Look, Lee, I know that Jennifer always asks you the very same opening question. And so today, since she's not here, I'm going to carry on that tradition for her. So why is the sign of the Beaver part of our Challenge 1 curriculum?
Well, she asks me every week so that I have a purpose for being here. So I appreciate that I get asked because you guys are rock stars when it comes to books and nobody needs me. But I think people sometimes are really curious about why various books are in the curriculum.
Absolutely.
And especially if you think about Challenge 1, for many people, they consider that their first high school year. And we open up with this very skinny, very easy to read book. And I just want parents to know that, that's part of the whole pedagogical strategy of Classical Conversations is to look at how families really are at certain times a year and what they're able to do to make things at the first week of the semester and the last week of the semester not particularly hard because there's all kinds of other things that are going on at that time. And then another thing, well, essentially that's one reason why we have the sign of the Beaver. But another thing we've done here at Classical Conversations that if you've joined us probably in the last decade, you may not have even noticed, is we do things backwards from a lot of other classical curriculums where they will have 3 or 4 cycles of things in chronological order. And as a classicalist who knows that we're working on the art of education, we like to start with grammar, and not just grammar, but familiar grammar. So our challenge AB1 students actually read books that are close to home, books about their own country, books that are easy for them to read in general, because this might be the first time they're writing essays and putting together projects and having to debates and forensic events. And so there's the just kind of time element, as well as they should know a little bit about their own history before they jump into whatever the literature is for that semester. And so that's why the sign of the Beaver's there, right in Challenge 1. I think that then the other one we're thinking about, not just the kids and what's going on at home, but the parents. We are homeschoolers. We are not experts in subject people. We are masters of everything. You know, a long time ago, people would say, I'm a jack of all trades, a master of one. And of course, moderns change that to say a jack of all trades, a master of none. And we don't believe that. We believe you can master many things. But if this is your first time through a literature course with one of your children, you may not be very good at it yet. So as a parent, you want to have material that's familiar to you also, because you may be in that grammar stage of literature studies. So we've tried just really hard to think about loving on the families that want to be successful in homeschool, because we've seen now after 26 years that if you'll start gently, your child can finish challenge 4, translating the Aeneid into Latin and reading Caesar and Cicero. And a lot of those books that folks start off their high school years with, we instead finish strong when our students have a lot of world history, a lot of grammar, a lot of Latin, a lot of cartography, have a lot of discussions and debates, and they can tackle those ancients in challenge 4, where it might mean something to them, rather than when they're 14 and are still just trying to figure out what in the world's going on in you know, in those high school years. So that's longer than normal in my introduction, but I wanted to remind people of a lot of the reasons we do what we do here in Classical Conversations.
I loved it. I love the answer. It was very inspiring, very hospitable. And it's one of the things that sets us apart, that we are about more than the academics. We're about the whole person and the whole family. I love it, Lee. Thank you. So Kelly, actually this author, Elizabeth George Speare, writes several of the books we read in our challenge curriculum, including The Bronze Bow and The Witch of Blackbird Pond. So can you tell us a little bit about this author?
I'm so glad that you asked that question, because I think, along with what Lee said about students having an awareness of their history, I think we as readers also need to have an awareness of where the written words that we're taking in are coming from. And so Elizabeth George Speare, I consider her to be an author of many surprises. So as I've read about her past, you know, there is a biographical paragraph in each of our books, but I dug a little deeper and I found out some interesting facts about her. She was born in 1908, so that gives you an idea of the time period of history in which she came into the world, and she was born in Massachusetts. And if you are a CC family listening to this book club, immediately you'll recognize that as the setting of many of her novels, not all of them, but many of them. That New England area is near and dear to her heart. So she actually began writing when she was young, about the same age as many of our essential students, and loved the written word so much that she went on to pursue a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in English. And the interesting thing is, she didn't publish a book until her children were in middle school. She, you know, enjoyed being a mother, and she enjoyed spending time at home with her children. And it wasn't until they were actually moving into high school that she decided, you know, I think I might want to do something like author amazing children's literature. So she published her first book in 1957 when she was 49 years old. And her first book was called Calico Captive. And then after that, you know, you would think after she experienced success, she might, you know, become a prolific author. She really wasn't. She only wrote a few books, but each of them were so well received within the children's literature community. The books that we read, The Witch of Blackbird Pond and The Bronze Bow, were both written in the late 50s and early 60s. But her last book, the one that we're discussing today, The Son of the Beaver, wasn't written until 1983. And so I just find it interesting that she wrote when she had time to write and when the mood struck her to publish. She passed away in 1994, but before she passed away, she was actually awarded the Laura Ingalls Wilder Medal, which is awarded to authors, living authors, whose books are considered substantial and lasting contributions to the world of children's literature. And she's considered to be one of the top 100 children's book authors of all time. And one of the things that I found consistent as people described her and her books was that she made history vivid and alive. for
Yeah.
children. And so I think that is one of the things that we love about her as an author, as our challenge students are diving into these books, that it makes the everyday of history come alive and seem real to them, which opens up, as Lee said, doors for conversation about different topics. So that's a little bit about Elizabeth George Speare,
Cool.
our author. I find her to be an author of surprises.
I think
You know what,
that's really cool.
The one thing that's really surprising about her too is she writes in this style of somebody's from the books published in the 40s and 50s, though she was in the 80s. So she's one of our most recent authors that we have in Challenge A, B, and 1, because we very much protect the vision of traditional family. And so it's really great that she carried that on into a longer
Yeah.
time. And I'm seeing our, one of our past guests, Avi, who wrote The Cross of Lead, has done the same thing. He really values family in the books that he's writing.
Yeah, I loved that. I love that you pointed out that although she had the desire to write books as a young person, she waited till her kids were junior high, coming into high school. And it makes me wonder, so many of her books are these coming of age stories. And we've got a lot of coming of age stories in the challenge curriculum. I wonder if she saw the struggles and the just the life experiences of those coming of age young people, and that motivated her to write. So these coming of age stories that we have a lot of in the challenge curriculum, this story fits that description. But there are other themes too. Linnell, what other themes do you see in Sign of the Beaver?
Right. So Lee mentioned how she appreciated so much Elizabeth George Speare's emphasis on the family. So that is a definite theme that runs through it. Just the relationship between grandfather, the Indian grandfather and his grandson, and then the Matt and his father. So just the sweet relationships between family are really highlighted. Another theme would be friendship. So the friendships that develop within the story, those are just a very sweet relationships there. And then also you find the theme of the anti-colonial narrative, which is very interesting in the way that they contrast it, even within the story, with Robinson Crusoe. So you see this idea that Elizabeth George Speare was definitely portraying the Indians and the white settlers as equals. There wasn't a hierarchy there. They were very much both created in the image of God and equal human beings.
That's really good. That's really good.
So that's what you meant
Good
by
things to bring up.
anti-colonial narrative. I was wondering if you would define that term. So meaning that there was no whether there was colonization or not, that wasn't the emphasis. It was
Right.
relationships.
Yes, and it was the equality of the two. Yeah.
Yeah. I loved the relationships in there. And I liked one of the aspects that I liked as a child or as a younger person when I read this to my younger children, and it resonated with them. Matt was a young person and he had certain likes and dislikes and desires and skills, and they like to put themselves into the story as much as they could. So let's think for just a second, in what ways in the story are Matt's skills and circumstances, even what he desires, how are those similar to those of a modern day child? And in what ways are his skills and circumstances and desires different than a modern day child?
So what I thought was, go ahead, Kelly. Oh no.
Well,
Sure.
Go ahead, Lena.
We're all talking today.
Okay, everybody's excited. Linnell, you're first.
Okay. So I think as reading this book as a mom of two sons, there are definitely things that resonated with me of this idea that's similar then as similar now. And so I see young men, even today, as in that time period, they want to know if they have what it takes. Do I have
Hmm.
what it takes to be a man? Do I have what it takes to, stand on my own for a while? And so you definitely see Matt and even his Indian friend, right? They both really want
Mhm.
to know, do I have what it takes to go on and into manhood? So that really stood out to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Kelly, what were you going to say?
Well, I'm also the mother of two sons, and so I
Yeah.
see many of the same things. I think one thing that resonates with me as I read this book for the first time was that I look at Matt and I see such a desire to be pleasing to his father in that
Mhm.
pursuit of what manhood looks like. He
Mhm.
wants his father to be pleased. And what a great parallel for our
Mhm.
challenge students to grasp onto, that as believers should be our desire for our Heavenly Father as
Mhm.
well, that he looks at us and he says, well done. But we, just like Matt, can sometimes struggle with, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And when we encounter difficulties or new situations that we're completely unprepared for, which, in this book, it is rife with all the
Mhm.
things that young men love to read about. There's adventure and there's
Danger.
Mhm.
danger, so many things for them to appreciate, because these are real struggles that
Right.
historically settlers did encounter. As we look at this book as believers, I think we can definitely identify times that we've been through similar struggles metaphorically, with the
Mhm.
heart desire to be pleasing to our Lord and Savior. So that is
Mhm.
one thing that resonated with me. Lee, I know you were excited to talk too, so why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so I'll just add that I liked how she portrayed, as he got lonelier in the woods, a need for a friend. But even though he
Mm.
didn't want a friend, like so many young men, he didn't just go make friends. Like they had to
Mhm.
feel each other out and figure out
Mhm.
how was this friendship going to proceed. So even though there's a lot of loneliness that both those boys seem to have experienced, that doesn't change their personality. They still, have a way of approaching people. And that's going to
Yeah.
be true today. So
Yeah.
even in the opposite situation, we throw all kinds of kids into all kinds of school situations. That doesn't make them social butterflies, right?
Mhm.
Right.
They have to
Right.
figure it out the way that with the personality God gave them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I always found it interesting when I led discussions on this book in my Challenge One, when I was a Challenge One director. It was always fun to ask the kids, okay, now, have your parents ever left you home alone for
Mhm.
like several weeks to figure life out for yourselves? And they're just like completely bumfuzzled that a parent would ever do that, because they were born in an era when they were
Mhm.
barely, some
Mhm.
of them barely left alone for an hour or for an afternoon until they were junior high age. And so that's one way that Matt's circumstances
Mhm.
are very different from what our Challenge One students are used to experiencing.
Mhm.
For sure. I can remember when I was directing Challenge one of the young men in one of the classes that I led just was incredulous about the fact that this
Yes.
family would quote unquote abandon him. And I
Right.
remember him saying, I don't even have my driver's license yet. I don't think my parents would leave me at home for 8 weeks, or 7 weeks in the book,
Right.
Mhm.
by myself to figure things out. And then
Right.
he looked very thoughtful. And he said, but maybe I need to be the kind of person that they would trust
That
at.
Mhm.
And I think that
yeah.
was one of the richest conversations that we had
Yes.
about how do we
Yes.
become the type of person like Matt was in his father's eyes to give
Mm-hmm.
him that responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And
I mean,
maybe
Mhm.
what skills do we need? What skills do we need to give our children so that they would be able to take care of themselves and navigate well? Lee, I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. It's hard on Zoom when we all are excited. Yeah, so, what are those skills? And so this is such a great homeschooling story because the skills
Mm-hmm.
came from his relationship with his family. And
Mhm.
obviously he managed the number of months in the woods by himself. But, he got some help from the Indian family, but nobody thought anything odd about that. And one of the reasons I picked this book was because Abraham Lincoln and his sister had the exact same story when they were 12 and 10. They were left for 3 months out in the Illinois wilderness because their mother had died. And their father looked at him and said, "We need a mother." And so he went back east and left these a 10 and 12-year-old, and he found them, 3 months later and brought a new mom to them. This stuff's true. And
Right,
it's
right.
not that we want our children to ever have to suffer like that, but on the other hand, we sure want them to be able to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Lee, I think it's time for us to thank our sponsor.
Well, how about that? That went by fast.
I know.
Well, we want to thank classicalconversationsbooks.com for sponsoring these conversations and for letting us promote the books that they sell at classicalconversationsbooks.com. And just remind you, you can go to leebortons.com or my YouTube station at Lee Bortons, where you may listen to any of the previously recorded episodes. And on my websites where you can find out what episodes are coming up and what books that you might want to purchase in order to participate in this or to listen to the discussion. And one thing that I haven't been real good about saying is that these discussions should be super helpful to a tutor in challenges who's not quite sure how to discuss books with young people. You guys do an excellent job of bringing out the themes and the settings and the plots and the various messages that are in them. So if you have a tutor that you think doesn't know about these the Words Aptly Spoken series, make sure you let them know, because the CC calendar year is coming up soon and our communities will be starting, and there's almost 15,000 people tutoring and directing for us.
Man.
And they all have different strengths and weaknesses. And so
Right.
we make these podcasts and have the support we do because we know there's all kinds of things people need to work on and be encouraged in. So thanks for letting me say that. It's a little longer this time. I'm long-winded today. I'll stop talking.
Okay, well, next week, like Lee said, we will keep doing the Challenge One books. Next week, our author is still Elizabeth George Speare, but we'll be looking at The Witch of Blackbird Pond. Okay, but let's go back to our Sign of the Beaver. We're going to read the opening passage of the book. It will kind of introduce the premise and a couple of the characters. So, Kelly, read us that section so we can all know the same things.
Sure. All right. This comes from chapter 1. And our students in Challenge B become very familiar with the exposition at the beginning of a story. So Lisa's right. This is a good introduction to several of our main characters and the setting. Matt stood at the edge of the clearing for some time after his father had gone out of sight among the trees. There was just a chance that his father might turn back, that perhaps he had forgotten something or had some last word of advice. This was one time Matt reckoned he wouldn't mind the advice, no matter how many times he had heard it before. But finally, he had to admit that this was not going to happen. His father had really gone. He was alone, with miles of wilderness stretching on every side. He turned and looked back at the log house. It was a fair house, he thought. His mother would have no cause to be ashamed of it. He had helped to build every inch of it. He had helped to cut down the spruce trees and haul the logs and square and notch them. He had stood at one end of every log and raised it, one on top of the other, fitting the notched ends together as snugly as though they had grown that way. He had climbed the roof to fasten down the cedar splints with long poles and dragged up pine boughs to cover them. Behind the cabin were the mounds of corn he had helped to plant, the green blades already shooting up, and the pumpkin vines just showing between the stumps of trees. If only it were not so quiet. He had been alone before. His father had often gone into the forest to hunt for hours on end. Even when he was there, he was not much of a talker. Sometimes they had worked side by side through a whole morning without his speaking a single word. But this silence was different. It coiled around Matt and reached into his stomach to settle there in a hard knot. He knew it was high time his father was starting back. This was part of the plan that the family had worked out together in the long winter of 1768, sitting by lamplight around the pine table back in Massachusetts. His father had spread out the surveyor's map and traced the boundaries of the land he had purchased in Maine territory. They would be the first settlers in a new township. In the spring, when the ice melted, Matt and his father would travel north. They would take passage on a ship to the settlement at the mouth of the Penobscot River. There, they would find some man with a boat to take them up the river and then on up a smaller river that branched off from it, many days' distance from the settlement. Finally, they would strike out on foot into the forest and claim their own plot of land. They would clear a patch of ground to build a cabin and plant some corn. In the summer, his father would go back to Massachusetts to fetch his mother and sister and the new baby, who would be born while they were gone. Matt would stay behind and guard the cabin and the corn patch. It hadn't been quite so easy as it had sounded back in their house in Quincy. Matt had had to get used to going to sleep at night with every muscle in his body aching. But the log house was finished. It had only one room. Before winter, they would add a loft for him and his sister to sleep in. Inside, there were shelves along one wall and a sturdy puncheon table with 2 stools. One of these days, his father promised he would cut out a window and fasten oiled paper to let in the light. Someday, the paper would be replaced with real glass. Against the wall was a chimney of smaller logs, daubed and lined with clay from the creek. This, too, was a temporary structure. Over and over, his father had warned Matt that it wasn't as safe as a stone chimney and that he had to watch out for flying sparks. He needn't fear. After all the work of building this house, Matt wasn't going to let it burn down about his ears. 6 weeks, his father had said that morning, maybe 7. Hard to reckon exactly. With your ma and sister, we'll have slow going, especially with the new little one. You may lose track of the weeks, he had added. Easy thing to do when you're alone. Might be well to make notches on a stick, 7 notches to a stick. When you get to the 7th stick, you can start looking for us. A silly thing to do, Matt thought, as though he couldn't count the weeks for himself. But he wouldn't argue about it, not on the last morning. Then his father reached up to a chink in the log wall and took down the battered tin box that held his watch and his compass and a few silver coins. He took out the big silver watch. Every time you cut a notch, he said, remember to wind this up at the same time. Matt took the watch in his hand as gently as if it were a bird's egg. You aim to leave it, Pa? He asked. It belonged to your grandpa. Would have belonged to you anyhow, sooner or later. Might as well be now. You mean it's mine? Aye, it's yourn. Be kind of company hearing it tick. The lump in Matt's throat felt as big as the watch. This was the finest thing his father had ever possessed. I'll take care of it, he managed finally. I knowed you would. Mind you don't wind it up too tight.
Oh man. I mean, like I can smell the dirt floor and I can feel the wind and I can just feel what that little boy is feeling. Okay. So that was the opening passage. What do we learn in the opening passage about Matt, about his family, the situation, why he was being left like that, the circumstances of the land? What did you guys learn?
One of the things that strikes me, I think Kelly mentioned this idea of trust, and it's very evident that Matt's father trusts him, that he's leaving him, and that he gives him this watch that was his grandfather's. I think that was an amazing gift to Matt to realize how much his father trusted him to entrust him with that, with that was very special watch. So
yeah, that's cool.
And then it ends with saying it was recognized as his most prized possession. And of course, throughout the book, we find out that is not true, that his family is that man's most prized possession.
Yeah.
So what I love about that opening, and so many good writers of coming of age stories do this, it's interesting enough to keep their attention. You almost know the whole story in those 2 pages, but you have so many questions then you want to just like, keep reading.
Yes, I love that. It makes you wonder, okay, so how is he going to grow into himself? What will he be surprised by? Because there are lots of things in there that you think, oh, you thought that wasn't important. Ha, that's going to become important. And that's going to become, and that's not going to be so important. And you just don't know yet. And how will you find out?
I love the way that the author gives hints to Matt's character
Yeah.
without, overtly saying to us, he was diligent. He was exacting. He was all these things that I'm sure his father saw,
Right.
in this fictional world that we're reading about. But it makes you look forward to seeing how those character traits are either fleshed out or challenged throughout the rest of the book. And I think it's one of the things that makes this story so intriguing for our Challenge 1 students, because they want to see, is Matt going to be the person that his father thinks he is, or is he going to struggle? And so they look for those situations to arise in the book where that character that's been established is challenged. And I love the way that she reveals the setting so sneakily.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because she talks about how this was part of the plan that the family had worked out together in the long winter of 1768. She doesn't come out and say, in 1768, we all sat at a table.
Right.
She
Right.
it so beautifully into the narrative of the story. And like Lee said, that's just the sign of a good author, to be able to paint that picture well.
Right. Those details just become part of the story that tells us without telling us. And that's great.
Exactly.
Okay. So now early in the book, Matt is going to meet two Native Americans, Sackness and his grandson, Atienne. So Sackness agrees to help make sure Matt has enough to eat if Matt will agree to teach Atienne how to read English. So it's kind of a trade-off. Matt uses one of his favorite books, Robinson Crusoe, to teach Atienne. So, Linnell, read that passage for us so we can all know it.
Sure. Matt stuck to his part of the bargain as well, though the lessons were an ordeal for them both. Matt knew well enough what a poor teacher he was. Sometimes it seemed that Atienne was learning in spite of him. Once the Indian had resigned himself to mastering 26 letters, he took them in a gulp, scorning the childish candle and door and table that Matt had devised. Soon he was spelling out simple words. The real trouble was that Atienne was contemptuous, that the whole matter of the white man's words seemed to him nonsense. Impatiently, they hurried through the lessons to get on with Robinson Crusoe. Matt suspected that the only reason Atienne agreed to come back day after day was that he wanted to hear more of the story. Skipping over the pages that sounded like sermons, Matt chose the sections he liked best himself. Now he came to the rescue of the man Friday. Atienne sat quietly, and Matt almost forgot him in his own enjoyment of his favorite scene. There was a mysterious footprint on the sand, the canoes drawn up on the lonely beach, and the strange, wild-looking men with two captives. One of the captives they mercilessly slaughtered. The fire was set blazing for a cannibal feast. Then the second captive made a desperate escape, running straight to where Crusoe stood watching. Two savages pursued him with horrid yells. Matt glanced up from the book and saw that Atienne's eyes were gleaming. He hurried on. No need to skip here. Crusoe struck a mighty blow at the first cannibal, knocking him senseless. Then, seeing that the other was fitting an arrow into his bow, he shot and killed him. Matt read on. The poor savage who fled but had stopped, though he saw both his enemies had fallen, yet was so frightened with the noise and fire of my piece that he stood stock still and neither came forward nor went backward. I hallooed again to him and made signs to him to come forward, which he easily understood, and came a little way, then stopped again. He stood trembling, as if he had been taken prisoner and just been to be killed, as his two enemies were. I beckoned to him again to come to me, and gave him all signs of encouragement that I could think of, and he came nearer and nearer, kneeling down every 10 or 12 steps in token of acknowledgment for saving his life. I smiled at him and looked pleasantly, and beckoned to him to come still nearer. At length he came close to me, and then he kneeled down again, kissed the ground, and taking my foot, set it upon his head. This, it seemed, was a token of swearing to be my slave forever. Atian sprang to his feet, a thundercloud wiping out all pleasure from his face. Nada, he shouted. Not so. Matt stopped, bewildered. Him never do that. Never do what? Never kneel down to the white man. But Crusoe had saved his life. Not kneel down, Atian repeated fiercely. Not be slave. Better die. Matt opened his mouth to protest, but Atian gave him no chance. In 3 steps, he was out of the cabin. Now he'll never come back, Matt thought. He sat slowly, turning over the pages. He had never questioned that story. Like Robinson Crusoe, he had thought it natural and right that the wild man should be the white man's slave. Was there perhaps another possibility? The thought was new and troubling.
And what a great sentence and thought that is. The thought was new and troubling. And that's what happens to our students in community. They are met by a lot of thoughts that perhaps for them are new and troubling. So in what ways is reading a book, even a familiar book, because some of our students come to us having already heard or read this story, right? But in what ways is reading a book, even a familiar one in community, different from reading a book by yourself?
Well, I'll jump in. So if you actually like that scene, it's fun to talk to somebody else. And if you don't like that scene, it's fun to talk to somebody else. So one thing that a pastor told me is that when Christians learn to think, they go find other people who like to think. And
That's
so
right.
we our children model that. And we see that in the book. Matt and Atian are making each other think.
Yes, yes. It's really good to get other people's perspectives, right? So many times we grow up in our families and we think things one way, we see things one way. And so it's really valuable to have that ironing, sharpening iron in a classroom, in a community situation where you're hearing other people's point of view. It's so valuable to have that perspectives.
Well, for sure. And I think our challenge communities should be safe places where our students can entertain ideas without feeling forced to accept an idea. And to be circumspect and to be able to discuss things because, obviously one of the benefits of being a community is not everyone is going to agree or like one particular part. There will be dissension, and learning how to navigate that with love and loving our friends well, even in spite of conflict, is definitely a skill that is much needed in the world that we live in today, and a wonderful thing for our Challenge 1 students who are just beginning, those formative years, thinking through concepts like ownership and discipline, and then in Challenge 1, freedom. To think about that concept in light of what Matt has just experienced with ATN is a great conversation.
Yeah. I think go ahead.
Like you did. Yeah, so another thing that I want to point out is what good pedagogy she has in this. So Matt, Robinson Crusoe is a hard read. And so Matt knows you don't have to read every page, but you can still enjoy the book and that you don't have to give up. And so I don't know that we're always so good at teaching our children, just read the parts that are interesting to you. And that's what he did. So I love that about the book too.
Yeah, I like it that he recognized that there are parts of the book that are going to be boring or uncomfortable to read together. But what I was going to say a minute ago is that one of the best things about challenge for my girls is that they learn to be okay with being uncomfortable with some new ideas, to be able to think, okay, so that idea, for whatever reason, makes me really uncomfortable. How do I ask questions about that? How can I explore that? Either so that I can become more comfortable with your point of view, or so that I understand what it is about what I believe that makes that uncomfortable and unacceptable to me. And I know that that's true because as my children grew up and graduated and went to college and went out into the world, one of their best skills to this day is listening and asking good questions of people who have different positions and experiences and beliefs, and not being uncomfortable with the differences.
Mm-hmm.
So look, after Atienne's reaction, what prejudices or assumptions does Matt recognize in himself? What did it make him think about?
I think Matt recognizes that he's always assumed that his way was the right way and the best way,
Mhm.
which
Maybe the only way. Mhm.
right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, this book and Robinson Crusoe are so timely for the conversations that are in the media every single day, that we've always been asking, how do you deal with
Mhm.
different people? And if you read more of the book, you'll find that in general, Matt does struggle with the fact that he's not an Indian and they're Indians. He knows there's a
Mhm.
difference between
Mhm.
them, but he also knows
Mhm.
he needs them.
Right.
And he enjoys their company. And so there's a lot of lessons about just getting
Yeah.
along with people who are different, and
Yeah.
not just this book.
Mm-hmm.
Robinson Crusoe is more preachy. It doesn't have quite the modern ending that, this book would have, but it still asks those same kind of questions.
Yeah.
Or inspires them, maybe I should say. And for people who don't know, our students in Challenge 2 do read Robinson Crusoe. So here they're
Mhm.
introduced to it in a friendly way, and then they get to
Mhm.
read it the following year.
Yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
So as winter approaches, so to bring you on through to the end of the story, as winter approaches, Matt's father has still not returned. And Sackness presents Matt with a really tough decision. So Lee, read our final passage so we can see what's going on.
The old man's face was grave, but he did not ask about the lessons. Time of sun gets shorter, he said, like footsteps of birds. Soon, ice on water. I know it's October, Matt said, maybe November. He had not wanted to count his sticks these last 3 weeks. Indian go north now, Sockness continued. Hunt moose. All Indians go. ATN not come more to learn white man signs. Matt could not answer. White father not come, Sackness went on. Matt spoke quietly. He ought to be here any day now. Sackness looked at him soberly. Maybe him not come, he said quietly. Anger flared up in Matt. He could not allow this man to speak the fear he'd never dared to admit to himself. Of course he'll come, he said too loudly. He might even come today. Snow comes soon, Sackness persisted. Not good white boy stay here alone. White boy come with Indians. Matt stared at him. He did not mean go on the hunt with them, the most important hunt of the year. Sackness smiled for the first time. Sackness teach white boy hunt moose like Etienne. White boy and Etienne be like brothers. A sudden joyful hope sprang into Matt's mind. He realized at this moment just how anxious he had been. This was a way out. He did not have to stay here alone all through the long winter. Then, as swiftly as it had come, this new hope died away. In spite of his longing, in spite of his being afraid, he knew what he had to answer. Thank you, he said. I'd like to go on the hunt, but I cannot do that. When my father comes, he wouldn't know where I'd gone. Leave white man's riding. Matt swallowed hard. Something might happen to the cabin. He's trusting me to take care of it. Maybe him not come, Sackness said again, not smiling now. He'll be here soon, Matt insisted. He was ashamed that his voice broke in the middle of the word. If he couldn't come, he'd send someone to tell me. He'd find some way no matter what happened. You don't know my pa. Sackness was silent for some time. White boy, good son, he said at last. But better you come. Sackness glad for white boy be canoeness. Matt could only keep shaking his head. The man's words had brought a great lump to his throat. Thank you, he managed. You've been very good to me, but I have to stay here. Without another word, Sackness held out his hand. Matt put his own hand into that bony grasp, and then the two Indians turned and went away. Etienne had not even said goodbye. There would be no lesson that morning, no story, no tramping in the forest or fishing. not this morning or any other morning. Close to panic, Matt wanted to run after them. He wanted to tell them that he had changed his mind, that he would go with them anywhere rather than stay here alone with winter coming on. But he set his jaw tight and stood where he was. After a few minutes, he reached for his axe and fell to splitting logs with a fury. He couldn't keep from thinking, however, was he just being foolish and stubborn? Wasn't going with them the wisest thing he could have done? Wouldn't his father have understood? He remembered hearing that many white men and white women too had been captured by the Indians and had lived many years in the wilderness, did not want to return to the white world when they had a chance, but had chosen instead to live with the Indians. He never understood that, but now he could see very well how it might happen. He no longer distrusted them. He knew that Etienne and his grandfather would be kind, that even the grandmother would welcome him, and that they would share with him whatever they had, no matter how little. He had found friendship and goodwill in their cabin. He had envied Etienne his freedom, unhampered life in the forest, and the boisterous comradeship in the village. If he'd been captive as a child and raised as an Indian boy, how would he himself have chosen? It wouldn't be the same to make that choice deliberately. He was proud that they'd wanted him to live with them, but he knew that he could never be really proud as Etienne was proud of being a hunter. He belonged to his own people. He was bound to his own family as Etienne was bound to his grandfather. The thought that he might never see his mother again was sharper than hunger or loneliness. This was the land his father had cleared to make a home for them all. It was his own land too. He could not run away.
Oh, can't you just feel? Can't you just feel this kid struggling with that decision? It had to have been a really difficult decision for Matt. So, what are some of the reasons he should have gone with Sackness and Etienne?
Maybe certainty of protection.
Okay.
Because Sackness had been providing meat to him to help him. And so now he would be taking that responsibility on himself. And just companionship, because Etienne was his friend. And now, as Lee was reading, I was thinking, wow, they have really accepted him. Like, he feels like not only has he proven himself to be worthy in the eyes of his father, but he's proven himself to be worthy in the eyes of his friend's grandfather, which, he really wanted to earn his respect.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's two good reasons to go: safety and friendship. What are some of the reasons he should have stayed?
Well, can I add one of the reasons he should have gone was it wasn't 7 weeks, it was like 4 months now.
Right. It's like,
So-
okay, something has gone wrong.
Yeah. So, but
Yeah.
I don't think there's a right or wrong reason, either one, or choice, right? That's another thing that's good about this book.
Yeah.
But he trusted his dad, and he indicates that even if something had happened to his dad would make sure somebody else came.
Right. 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 Yeah.
Right.
Well,
That
and you
really
see-
struck me too.
Yeah. You see his statement of ownership too, right? It
Right, it
was
was his
his
own
own
land.
land.
Mhm.
Right. So now
Mhm.
he doesn't necessarily feel as if his father has to be there in order for him to have ownership. He is
Mhm.
taking ownership.
It has become his land because he has worked it and he's protected it and he's lived on it. So he's staying for honor and for pride and for ownership. Yeah. I like what you said a lot, Lee, that there's not really a wrong decision there. As he came of age, he became able to make a good decision, a wise decision. And we could make the case for either one. That was a fun discussion, y'all.
Such a good book. Yeah, I want someone to drop me off in the woods for 4 months.
Oh my goodness. Some days I think the same thing.
Well, thank you so much, you guys, for being with us again, and I look forward to next week where we get to continue to talk about our lovely author and and a book about a young woman this time instead of a young man. So we look forward to that. Thank you, gang. Bye.
All right. Bye,
Thank
y'all.
you.